Okay, so welcome to our program. Today our guest is Olena Lennon. It's a professor at the Department of National Security of the University of New Haven. So, hello.
Good morning, good evening.
Whatever.
Thanks for having me.
As long as you are representing Department of National Security, I think we will talk about security, and not only national, but international. But my first question will be about your overview of Ukrainian diplomacy, how it's been working during all these years.
But first of all, as far as why, what the diplomatic efforts have been on the part of not just the Zelensky administration, but the Ukrainian civil society at large, I have to say, we have seen a tremendous transformation. And I think some of it is obviously the great job that the Zelensky administration has done in terms of strategic communication. I think that there's one thing that the past year has taught us in terms of how to conduct international relations, and that's that you cannot underestimate the importance of strategic leadership. And I think that Zelensky really found himself at the right time, in the right place, by galvanizing the international community around, not just the Ukrainian cause, but by communicating clearly and effectively why Russian aggression against Ukraine is not just about Ukraine's security. That is, it is about Europe's security and even more broadly, global security. So I think strategic communication has been one thing that you have to give Zelensky credit for it, and not just Zelensky, but the entire team and the Ukrainian civil society. So I have to say, from the United States perspective, a year ago, if you look at all the headlines around the world, then the message, the question on everybody's minds was, will Ukraine survive as an independent state? Will Ukraine retain its borders? A year ago, the question that we're all asking is how to integrate Ukraine into the European security architecture. When will Ukraine join the European Union? What role Ukraine will play in global economy? So huge, just in the 1 year has shown, huge transformations in terms of perceiving Ukraine, not just as a regional actor, but as a global actor. And I think that strategic communication has been key in this endeavor. And then going back to your question as far as why some countries in Central and Eastern Europe, for example, Hungary and Austria, have not been on board with sanctions and condemning the Russian aggression to the extent that Western European countries have done, or the United States. And I think some of it has to do with, deep-seated historical business links to Russia. Obviously, the efforts on Russian lobbying, Russian political warfare is nonstop, 24/7, all day. They do political warfare in Europe and in the United States, around the world, conditioning opinions, conditioning populations, promoting the Russian point of view, so to speak. So, and I think we see the results of this in some of these sort of political and public attitudes in Hungary and Austria. But I have to say, as far as how to combat it, again, number one is I think that Western communities, Western governments have to do a better job in counterintelligence by combating Russian narratives, combating Russian lobbying campaign, and also by galvanizing their own populations around promoting the narratives as to why Russian threat in Europe is real, why it is not likely to stop in Ukraine, and that it's not necessarily all conventional, that Russian the so-called hybrid warfare is just as threatening to European security. So it's all about communicating those messages to populations and combating Russian narratives to where those messages prevail. And I think that that's where Zelensky's administration really can serve as an example of how that sort of the public awareness campaign can be structured to be really effective.
Except for the lobbyists or the politicians that received money from Russian Federation during years and represented the interests, hiding interests of Russia inside, the working of intelligence services, undercover of some culture organizations in different countries, like Russian Culture Center or whatever. So it's the facts that in some countries there were just not only the culture experts, but mostly the representatives of some intelligence services. Whatever. Books, culture, language, propaganda, TV programs, using social media. And it's not only in Europe. As I can see from the American segment of YouTube, there are a lot of experts and a lot of people, even from the politician world, that sometimes spread Russian narratives. So how the situation changed during all this year in all these positions? I know that a lot of countries undercover this organization and trying to clean it out, the environment out of this Russian propaganda. But how it's going on in the United States? What can you observe? How the situation changed there?
The situation has changed dramatically, and I think that part of it is really the resistance of the Ukrainian people that have inspired people around the world, and has really shown that military balance is not just a matter of comparing numbers of troops and numbers of tanks and fighter jets. That the will to fight can be decisive, and the will to fight is what contributes to Ukraine's endurance. Right, and I think that seeing the efforts of the Ukrainian people, not just the military, but the entire, the Ukrainian society, civil society, Ukrainians overseas, and the way they have unified their efforts has been truly inspiring. And I think that is one of the reasons why the American audiences, international audiences, have really been kind of galvanized around this cause, because they see that this is not just about who controls, Bakhmut, or who controls Eastern Ukraine. This is about Ukraine surviving as a nation state, right? And I think that a great part in that sort of galvanizing effort has actually been done by Putin himself. Contrary to what he was trying to achieve, he actually achieved the opposite, right? So by trying to deny Ukraine its right to exist as a nation state, he actually did the opposite. He galvanized Ukrainians, he unified the so-called international community around the cause. So I think, again, the Russian regime, Putin's regime, has discredited itself. So there is really, the Ukrainians just kind of allowed the world to see what they have known about Russia for a long time. It is a criminal regime, and that it's unless its military machine is stopped and degraded and prevented from rebuilding itself, we're not going to see a change in behavior. There's no kind of self-correcting mechanism, right? Empires don't self-correct, right? They don't self-monitor. They must be stopped. They only stop where they're stopped.